I got you.
All right, all right. Hey, everybody. So thankful for everybody to join us today. Students, we have some amazing panelists here. I am so excited to get into the nitty-gritty with them. Okay, let's start off with the amazing Jasmine Worrells. So before she introduces herself, I want to explain her bio. So we're gonna say that she's motivated by a passion for equipping aspiring and returning elected officials with what it takes to run for office and win. Jasmine Worrells has trained more than 2,500 Democratic candidates from New Hampshire to Alaska on how to run successful political campaigns. Her training style intertwines core campaign concepts with realistic scenarios in a way that is digestible for first-time candidates and is refreshing for seasoned politicos, priming candidates with the ins and outs of running for office. In addition to being an astute political trainer, Jasmine Worrells is a strategic leader passionate about advancing underserved communities. She currently serves as an innovation team director with the city of Memphis in advancing innovative solutions to address the intersection of climate justice with wealth equity for Memphians. Previously, Jasmine served for the Chief of Staff of Memphis Shelby County Schools, supporting over 100,000 students, y'all, and 14,000 employees. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Jasmine played a key role in procuring and deploying 95,000 devices to students and supported student-focused initiatives like high-dosage tutoring, internship programs, and facility-led improvements. All right. She also led communications and strategic planning at KIPP Memphis Public Schools, driving brand elevation and student recruitment. She has received recognition such as the Rising Star by the American Society for Public Administration, Memphis Flyers Top 20 Under 30, and Urban Elite Top 40 Under 40. Jasmine is a dedicated mom to daughters Niall and Molly. Dog sons Caesar, is that right?
Sorry.
Sorry, I'm so sorry, y'all. And wife to Kenneth Worrells Jr. All right, we got a heavy hitter with us. She's just one of them, though. All right, so I just want to introduce Jasmine Worrells. Is there anything you want to say before we introduce everyone else?
No, I'm really excited to be here, Maya. Thanks to the STS team for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. But she's not the only person that's a heavy hitter. We got Mr. Gavin Mosley. All right, let's start off with him and his biography. Now, he's a professor, right? Teaching courses on energy transitions and public-private partnerships for rural and urban communities at the Jeb E. Brooks School of Public Policy at Cornell University. A registered lobbyist, most recently with Avangrid, a leader in renewables and utility industries, Gavin oversaw more than $2 million in targeted community investment, including electric bike and rail trail infrastructures in New York's Southern Tier, and represented the varying needs of the Avangrid before both chambers of the New York state legislature. Gavin began his career as an intern and aide to the Tennessee General Assembly's Finance Ways and Means Committee, led by the chairman, the late Representative Charles Sargent. Gavin later joined Teach for America as corpsman in the Memphis region and served as an educational leadership fellow with the Tennessee Department of Education before transitioning to New York. Gavin is an alumnus of Middle Tennessee State University, where he received his bachelor's in political science and received his graduate degrees in educational policy and public administration from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and Cornell University, respectively. He is a proud member of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. So welcome to have you, Gavin. Thank y'all. Now hold on, y'all. We have somebody that has led the city of Memphis on one hand, and we have an Ivy League professor on the other hand. Let's get to the next one because we just got a really, really nice set of panelists, okay? Last but very, very much not least, we got Miss Takesha Johnson, and she is the Director of Government Affairs and Advocacy at the Greater Memphis Chamber, where she connects business leaders with policymakers and elected officials at every level of government. She has shaped policy nationally with the Council of Court for Court Excellence in Washington, D.C., and locally as a legislative analyst for the Memphis City Council. She's earned her English degree from Spelman College and her JD from the University of Memphis Cecil C. Humphrey School of Law, where she was also selected for the Policy Advocacy Summer Fellowship and the Policy Fellowship (PPF), where in law school she served in leadership roles, worked as a pipeline graduate assistant for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and gained experience as a legal intern with the University Office of Legal Counsel. She is a graduate of the New Memphis Fellows Program and is currently part of the Leadership Memphis Executive Program Class of 2026. All right. She is also the founder of Whiff of Royalty. Let me stop that. Whiff of Royalty, a luxury candle company where she runs with her 8-year-old daughter, Royal. So happy to have you, Miss Takesha.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
All right, y'all. Now that we have, explained who our distinguished panelists are, and I definitely want y'all to make sure you stay in contact with them after this call, let's kind of get into this nitty gritty. Now, before we begin, this is going to be a fireside chat experience. We're going to kind of have like casual conversation with them, understand where they're coming from, understand where they're going, what they see for the future of political science, and we're going to ask them some of the questions that you guys sit in regarding their field and what they ended up doing. So before we begin, do you guys want to start off like exploring what the students asked you guys, or do you want to just start off talking about how you got into your fields and different things like that?
The teacher in me wants to always say start with the students,
With the student, yeah.
but I'll yield to the panels.
All right.
We're on the same page.
Y'all all want to put the students first. So we only have around 6 questions that were sent. And so we're going to start off with the first one. All right. So how could the policy making process be more visible and transparent to the public from your perspective, from your views?
Who wants to jump in first?
Okay, I'll jump in. I would say for me, it would be really lovely to see elected officials go into the communities and have maybe focus groups or more intimate conversations to just lay out the basics of what their roles are in advancing public policy issues that are particularly interesting or impactful to the communities that they serve. Because a lot of times it's difficult or intimidating to say getting involved in this space because you don't know what questions to ask or you don't know the language that's being used or even the simple processes on how legislation is moved to passage from its first introduction. And I think those conversations in the communities would be really helpful as we think about making public policy a space that feels like it truly uplifts and values the voices of those that they're intended to impact.
That makes sense.
I couldn't have said it better than Takesha. Just to piggyback off of that, one, the community engagement, community transparency piece from the elected position is very important and integral to getting folks involved. I'm a firm believer that you got to go into the community where folks are. In addition to that, I think that we have to have strong local partisan bodies like the local Democratic entities, the local Republican entities, whichever side of the aisle you fall on. Those entities should be making strides toward voter engagement and awareness so that folks know, like Takesha said, what elected positions are responsible for what types of policies. What do certain elected officials have the authority and responsibility to be able to do so that when you are doing advocacy, you're going to the right folks and asking the right questions, right? And so in addition to that community engagement aspect, we have to empower our local Democratic and Republican entities to go into community as well and do an information engagement piece to give voters knowledge and awareness so that they can be equipped to ask the certain questions that they need to ask when they do get at the table with these elected officials.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there are three pieces kind of in tandem with that, with both of the pieces that Jasmine and Takesha pointed out. I think first one, the lowest hanging fruit, is the integration of social media. I love the way that younger politicians, whether that's AOC, whether that's some of our elected officials out of Tennessee, London Lamar, who's a close friend of mine, the way that they integrate social media to catch a younger audience. For policy wonks like us, we love the sausage making process, which is what goes on behind the scenes, putting the policy together, getting the votes together for the policy. But at a high school level or at an undergraduate level, people may not necessarily be interested in that. They may be more issue based. So the social media integration piece is key. I think the second piece I would like to see is the integration of electeds in the curriculum building process across states. So states are mandated to come up with some type of civic engagement and social studies curriculum. And I think one of the ways that we could break down silos is putting forward a cross-partisan committee to look at what individuals need to learn about civic engagement. And that's very politically neutral. That's low-hanging fruit, and it's basically tiered at grade level. And the last piece is experiential learning. I think that the best learning that I've received, greater than any college classroom I've ever stepped foot in, were those experiences that I had outside of the classroom that taught me how to be civically engaged. Whether that was junior achievement in elementary school, whether that was bridge builders as a high school individual, whether that was being an intern. I'm a strong advocate for people in the political science spaces doing an unpaid internship during their college career. All of those things help me understand what public policy should look like. So I think those three pieces: social media integration, curriculum development with partisan officials or elected officials, and experiential learning. I think that helps get us where we need to go.
Oh, wow. So thank y'all so much for your responses. It's interesting talking to people who are on the other side, because like when you're just like a normal civilian or somebody who's just majored in political science, you don't really understand like all the different elements that could go into creating a more transparent society when it comes to politics. And we just feel like, okay, what's going on? So those little things that y'all mentioned, like it makes sense. And it does feel like you said, Gavin, low hanging fruit. These are little things that we can integrate, just talking to people, just, educating people. So thank y'all so much for that, knowledge. So the next question is, can y'all talk about the importance of public policy, especially now? Lots going on in the world. So, how does public policy affect us, or, where does its importance lie?
So, I mean, I would say, I have this slogan that I use, like public policy changes lives because it does. I think policy is king, in my opinion, because policy is law. And, I think that especially considering the current political landscape, there are a lot of emotions about impact of policy right now and a lot of authority being used to change policy, but it's because of how powerful policy is. Policy literally governs our day-to-day and our way of living. And so, I mean, as you explained, my background partially is in helping to identify and train candidates to run for office, candidates who come from communities that are underrepresented, candidates with backgrounds and representations themselves that may not be at decision-making tables, who can bring that insight and be able to push in on policy from those respective angles. I think it's so important that we have a diverse set of elected officials who can bring their own vantage points to policy, because oftentimes what you find is that the folks who get to weigh in on policy are along one uniform or aligned representation or set of viewpoints or perspectives. And so then what happens is when that policy gets implemented and when it is carried out in localities, in states, and even federally, you find that some folks benefit more than others. Some folks end up being disadvantaged, right? And so when you ask the question of how important is policy, it's very important. But I would even go as far to say, as the architects of policy is the most important piece. The folks who get to be at the table to talk about what goes in it, what the impact is going to be, what the benefit is going to be, what it looks like tangibly. And so for me, continuing to identify folks who are qualified to serve and run for office to impact local, state, and federal policy is very important just because of the implications on the back end.
Mhm. Going further with the point, oh, Takesha, you want to go?
No, I was agreeing with Jasmine.
So going further with the point that Jasmine made, one of the things that I always remind my students, and they probably get tired of me saying it, is that politics is the highway, but policy are the guardrails, right? So there's a lot of noise on the highway, but the guardrails are there basically for a few things, for sound barriers, to drown out noise, and then to ensure that you don't go off into an embankment. And I think more importantly than policy being important in today's time, it's making sure that we have individuals that are in power in policy spaces and in political spaces that understand how to maneuver the lever of government, right? The largest expansion that we saw in civil rights in the 20th century was during the 1960s. And one of the reasons that that became a highly effective time period was because you had two individuals on opposite sides of the aisle that knew how to move the levers of government. Lyndon Johnson in the executive branch, and Earl Warren, who's a Republican, a conservative, that was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And because they understood how to maneuver the levels of government, not just on the executive branch and the judicial branch, but also in the legislative branch, they were able to make these civil rights advances seem rather seamless. And they were able to do it in a way where you didn't have this acrimonious back and forth between the executive branch and the legislative branch and the judicial branch. That doesn't mean that you don't have disagreements, because that's what happens on the highway. That's politics. But if you do it in a way that showcases the strong abilities of all sides, it ensures that when that discussion is over, that advancement moves forward. And I think that's the power in policy, making sure that you have individuals that understand how to maneuver the levers.
Yeah. And just to add, policy is important because it dictates how people live, especially now in my role as Director of Government Affairs and Advocacy. It's particular to businesses and communities. So the public policy that is advanced through our office and that we are meeting with our local, federal, and state elected officials on, they're pivotal to whether or not the businesses in our communities, where those are the big businesses or the small businesses, thrive or struggle. So public policy gives us a voice at the table to create the livelihood that we want. So that means, especially now with so much going on with AI and just a lot of changes right now in our society, public policy is a gateway to determine what does investment look like in our communities, what does technology and workforce look like in our community that makes sense for us, because it may look different in different places. But public policy is that direct line to those jobs, to those investments, to ensuring that the people in our communities have a livelihood. So
Yeah.
important, very.
Policies are the rules.
Yeah.
The policies are the rules. And I mean, just because, the audience that we're speaking to are folks thinking about coming into policy arena, I know you'll hear me talk a lot about elected leadership, but elected leadership is not the only place to influence policy by far. In Takesha's work, Takesha influences policy. You have legislative aides that influence policy. Most elected positions, they're not the ones that are drafting the policy at all. They are, they have a team of folks who are experts in those arenas, who are drafting that policy for them to review and speak to any nuance or adjustments that they want to see, and then they carry the policy. But the actual architects and drafters of that policy can look a bunch of different ways. You can even influence policy from a lobbying standpoint, right? And so just what I want to try to do during this time is also weave in very tangible exposure to career opportunities. If you're not that person that wants to be out front in elected position, there is there are several avenues of ways for you to influence policy from behind the scenes.
Exactly. And actually, in my role as legislative analyst, I was one of the ones behind the scenes writing those policies, the resolutions, writing the zoning change ordinances, just all of the things that happen. The council member is the one that presents it to be voted on. But that is definitely a role where if you're just interested in the writing process, the research process, and are comfortable with passing your work along to have somebody else as the face, but still knowing that impact is being made, legislative analyst, legislative aid, and I think that those roles are on every level of government are definitely worth looking into as well.
Okay, I first of all, I thought that was amazing. One of the key things that I noticed in all of y'all's you know, speaking was agency, right? Like we all have the agency in some regard to influence policy and be a part of the process. And I think that's very important to note because there's a lot of people who do feel that helpless feeling, even, going into the political science world, like as a career field, it can be a bit disheartening because people make it seem like, there are no careers, there are no jobs, no real opportunities. I'm actually a political science. I actually majored in political science when I was in college and pivoted to tech because of that same type of narrative that was presented at the time. But, it's important for the students to know there are several places for you to funnel into that you can like not only go for a career, but also influence the policy and be a part of that process without necessarily being a candidate yourself. So thank y'all so much for sharing that. I would say the next question would be, how do you balance work and life?
Like we all laugh.
There's a such thing as balance.
Right. But no, but to that point, Gavin, I will I think it's important at the very forefront of your careers for you to understand that balance is not a thing. I wish that was something that someone would have told me. Balance is not a real concept. I'm not saying that you should. I'm not saying that you will be leading a life where you're totally entrenched in one area and not the other. That's not what I'm saying. But at every point of your life, as you move forward, something will weigh more than the other. It is very rare that you will look across the landscape of your life and you're equally invested in everything. Those levers may change as you grow and go through life, but there will be something that you're leaned into more heavily on. I'm in a phase of my life right now where, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, and I'm a professional. Some days I'm a little bit more leaned in professionally and a little less leaned in as a mom and as a wife. And sometimes I'm leaned in a little bit more as a mom and I'm a little less leaned in. So I want to first preface that in my opinion, balance is not a realistic concept, but just because it just doesn't translate that way in reality. I think one of the things that I try to do to maintain good proportion in the different aspects of my life is to one, just make sure I'm doing good checks, right? And so there may be times, like I mentioned, if I have to lean in heavy into work, because that's the season I'm in, I call it getting it out the mud. I tell my husband, hey, for the next month, I got to get it out the mud. So just know that I'm gonna slack up as being a wife and a mom, right? But I'll do a good check with my husband. If he's saying, hey, I need you to be more present with me, then I just know that if there is a round table at work and they're asking folks to take on projects, I might not need to take on as much. Same thing with my children. If I notice that they have more of a need for me, then I'll tell my husband, we can't have date night this Saturday. Let's do date night with the kids. And I won't stay late at work on Friday, right? So it's just about understanding how to tease those levers out so that you have what can resemble balance as much as possible, but understanding that it's not a realistic concept, in my opinion.
Yeah. So while there may not be a lot of balance in our work, it's equally important to have boundaries. So
Yes. Oh, yes.
there's power in saying no. And if you can't just don't have the capacity, you have to be honest with yourself and say, hey, no, be comfortable with passing something along to somebody else. I can speak to, especially as a young professional navigating a new space. Sometimes it's a little difficult because you come in, you want to prove, your worth and what you have to offer, when in reality, it's not a weakness to be able to delegate. And if I had known that early on in my career, I probably would have been in a better space now. So I encourage all of you to learn what your boundaries are, learn what are your absolute no's that you're not willing to bend on, and also being okay with delegating. There are going to be roles that you move into where you have the liberty to delegate. And when you have that power to do that, do it. And that also breeds leaders under you. And I think us as civic leaders, as professionals, it is our duty to make space for those to come after us. And in order to do that, we have to start giving opportunities early on and allowing people to operate in what their strengths are, because somebody may be better at doing something than you. And if you work together and leverage the strengths that you each have as individuals, then the project gets done, it gets done well, and you check it off the list and move on to the next thing. But please prioritize those boundaries, and being able to delegate and share responsibility when it's an option.
I would say, again, this idea of balance, I think when you make the conscious decision, right, whether you're a political science major or whether you're planning on going to law school or whatever you plan on doing, there's an element of public service that comes along with that. And when you make the conscious decision to be a public servant, whether that's on the elected side or whether that's behind the scenes, I think that you are consciously or unconsciously signing up for a life that can be at times unbalanced. The scales are just going, that's just the way that it's set up, because government doesn't shut down, right? Even while you are asleep, somewhere in the world, there is something going on that's impacting the United States at the federal level. There's something going on that's impacting Tennessee at the state level while you sleep. There's something going on, something as simple as trash collection. There's something going on at the local level that's impacting you from a governmental perspective while you are sleeping. But there has to be a person, or there has to be a group of people that are ensuring that when you wake up in the morning that your trash is picked up, or that the state dollars that trickle down into education, that those are actually facilitated and given to Shelby County schools. Or from the federal level, things such as benefits like SNAP, that those things are coordinated at a federal and state level to trickle down to you. So because of that, we as public servants, I just think our lives are built off of not being balanced. I will say, what I would challenge everybody to do is set their priorities early along in their career. And priorities shift as you get married, as you have children. If you choose not to get married, but you decide to have a life partner, all of those things are part of the transition of life. For me, and one of the reasons that I decided to go back into academia full time, my biggest priority as I get older are my parents. Right now, they are mobile. Right now, they can move freely as they please, but they're getting older. And I wanted to make sure that I was in a position where after 5 o'clock in the evening, if I decide that I want to, for lack of a better term, turn the lights out, I can do that. And academia allows that in a way that lobbying didn't necessarily give me the freedom to do. So set those priorities early on, because I will tell you, if you go into a legislative staffer role, even back when I was working at the Tennessee General Assembly, when budget season comes, it could be 3 in the morning and you're still at work. That's the nature of the beast. If you're a lobbyist, if it's legislative session and legislative session is running over, but you have a trip planned somewhere, that trip goes on the back burner, and your spouse or your partner has to kind of understand that that's the nature of the job. So again, I would say more than balance, it's just prioritizing and figuring out career-wise what you can work in from a priorities perspective.
I love that.
These are
Yes.
all great perspectives. It's important that, people know what they're getting into before they get into it. I did want to ask, based on something that you said, Gavin, is there any particular season that you guys usually do find yourselves to be the most busy and some are more of a lull? I know you said
Yeah.
budget, General Assembly, I guess during that time. So is there any particular, time?
For me, January, and that's whether it's teaching public policy, because there's still a state level government aspect of climate change and all the things that I teach about. So for me, January through June, that has always been the case. That's the busiest time of year for me. That was with the Tennessee General Assembly, as well as the New York State Assembly. You pretty much don't have a life for those 5 to 6 months. But it does allow you. I want to put the caveat on there. It does allow you, after that time is done, after the budget has been taken care of, after all of those decisions have been made in relation to it, there is an incredible amount of downtime. And that is why I love what we do. Because when I decide that I'm going on summer, like summer is really summer. Like there's not really much to do because everybody in the policy field, the electeds are out at Martha's Vineyard, the policy analysts are working from home. Like you have time to actually get back to self. So I would say the first half of the year is the busiest.
And Maya, just to piggyback off that, I think Gavin raised a great point when he mentioned it basically is around what the role is that you're, what type of work you're doing, right? I would say in my last role as chief of staff of Memphis Shelby County Schools, every day was like a 6 to 7. And that was a good day, right? The Saturdays were gone. It just was high crises, right? And so I was always on go. In that space, I think if you're working in like a educational space too, um, um, November and December are downtimes just because of holiday season, schools ramp down. And so that's something to consider in that space. If you are working in electoral politics, then your, electoral years are going to be the most rambunctious, where you're on all the time. Those off years, maybe not so much because you're doing candidate recruitment. But I will just use this as an opportunity to say that doing this work is fun. Like we all get a kick out of something. There's an adrenaline that comes with this work. When we are up and going and it's fast paced, I get a high off of that. I don't know about my colleagues, but it is worthwhile. And then when it does come time for rest, like Gavin said, whether you're going to Martha's Vineyard in the summer or Congressional Black Caucus Week is happening right now in DC, and there's a lot of learning, but there's a lot of fun happening too, right? So there are balances of the scale as far as work and play. But when it's work time, it's go time,
So
and usually you're going for a nice little stretch before you get to have downtime.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I guess we can go to the next question of what skills or experiences would you say are important for students who are looking to tackle a career in public policy?
Mm.
Takesha, you look like you want to jump in there. You want to jump in there?
Oh goodness. Sure. Skills, you definitely have to have interpersonal skills. You have to be able to talk to people. You have to be able to listen because it's so easy in this space to think you know what a community needs or what the need is based on your combined learned experiences, but you have to be willing to listen and understand that the needs may be different based on a particular community that you're advocating for. And we want to make sure that we're lifting up what it is that they need, because sometimes what we think is good is not what they want. And then, you're not seeing the impact that you would like to see. So definitely having those people skills, being flexible, because while we may know our day to day or think that we know, a lot of this work is putting out fires at times. And so that may mean being comfortable in the pivot. So
Mm.
also, so that is very important. And writing skills, really strong communication skills. So verbal, written, being able to articulate a point clearly and as straight to the point as possible is also really important skills that I will say. Um, And then, like Gavin said, those unpaid internships, you may have to do it because that experience is something that you're just not going to get in the classroom. And you don't really know the work until your hands are dirty in it and you're learning, you're seeing people work in the field. And those are experiences that sometimes we don't take advantage of because everybody wants to get paid. But sometimes taking that unpaid role will lead you to a paid role, but you have to really get yourself in a space where you're truly wanting to learn as much as you can.
I'll throw another skill on top of that too, because Takesha hit it on the head, but also learn very early on the art of compromising. I think the younger I was, the more, I mean, and I still am pretty progressive, but the more progressive and hell bent I was that I'm not moving on this, I'm standing on business, right? You don't always get that luxury, especially in politics and policy. You have to recognize, what gains you can get and what you may need to sacrifice. A lot of political work is being able to compromise and come to an agreement with folks who think totally different from you. And so if you feel uneasy having conversations with folks who think differently from you, or you're like an all or nothing type of person, it's going to be a challenge. Not saying you can't get through it, but it's going to be a challenge to move through the work unless you're willing to evolve out of that space. What I'll say from the experience standpoint is, like my folks have said, jump in. Their experiences abound, right? If you want to, get involved on a local campaign and help run that campaign, if you want to find an internship with city government this summer, if you want to, go and spend some time in Nashville at the state capitol and do a fellowship, if you want to join the Young Dems and become president, if you want to do the CBC fellowship in DC and go work on the Hill, right? There are so many opportunities to jump in and get very hands-on. Like Takesha said, get your hands dirty in public service and public policy, test the waters out, but get out there. This is the prime time for you all to be out at the events, showing up, showing out, letting people know who you are, what your interests are. A lot of great opportunities come out of conversation. Yeah, from me just showing up at this event and say, hey, I'm Jasmine and I'm interested. This was before I even got into my master's in public administration, but going out and saying, I'm interested in a life in public service. Do you know of any opportunities or folks I should be connected with? Really be getting it out the mud on networking and having conversations with folks in the space and uncovering opportunities that will really help you to be able to get leveraged and leaning into certain spaces that otherwise you may not have even known about. But stack your summers up with internship fellowship opportunities would be one of my biggest recommendations. You can do that locally at the state level or even in DC federally.
I would say because I mean, Takesha and Jasmine really pointed out the keys, and just to echo what they said, two things that resonate. Number one, humility, something I wish that I had learned a little bit earlier in my journey. And when I say humility, you know, especially if you're behind the scenes, it may very well be the case that you're the smartest person in the room, right? You may have a very good grasp on policy, how it's going to impact the community around you, but you're not the star, right? The elected official is the star. Or, in Takesha's role, like the CEO of the chamber is the star. And it's your goal to kind of help guide the quarterback, not be the quarterback. And you have to be humble enough to say, you know what? This is a moment where I need to step back, right? This is a moment where I need to provide the talking points. This is the point where I need to be the data person. Whatever role you're tasked with being, be humble enough, even if you're the smartest person in the room or the hardest worker in the room, be humble enough to accept what role you're being told to do. Secondly, I would say 1,000% writing. One of the quickest ways to get fired is writing a bad policy memo. That is one of the quickest ways in a policy or legislative capacity to be let go. Sharpen your writing skills, and that's something that doesn't take law school. It doesn't take a master's degree. Sharpen those skills while you're in undergrad. And the last piece, I go back to the internship piece. There was not a summer when I came home to Memphis. There was not a summer that I didn't volunteer with the campaign. And I say that as a point of importance because you never know where the next gig is going to come from. An unpaid campaign opportunity, if a person is elected, could turn into a full-time role. A full-time role in that person's office could lead to you being in a manager or a director position. We can't forget, we have so many individuals that were high-ranking officials within the Obama administration, and even some within the Biden administration that are in our age bracket, that made a one-off decision to volunteer for Obama for America. And because individuals saw their work ethic, because individuals saw their desire, their hunger, their thirst, that allowed them to move into positions at a higher level. So just keep those things in mind.
Okay, these are all like amazing. Like it's interesting because a lot of that is like interpersonal growth that one must make, just maturing and growing and learning to compromise and having a work ethic. I did want to ask because you did mention sharpen your writing skills, Gavin.
Mhm.
With the onset of AI, what has that been looking like for, the new, people who are writing those memos? Are they being written by AI? Is it still a, focus on doing it pen and paper? How does that affect the field?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we were just talking about this at a faculty meeting here at Cornell three days ago. So many colleges and universities, so R1 institutions have access to technology. So it's kind of like a counter to AI that we can tell it's going to tell us if you use AI and where you pulled it from. So and at Cornell, we have an academic integrity policy. So if you were to go against that, that automatically puts you up for sanction with the university. So I would say we don't see it as much here. We have this saying that AI should not be on top, but it should be in the midst. So we understand that individuals are going to use AI now, and we should use it to our benefit. I do believe that it becomes an asset for legislative staffers because you can look through a large amount of information in a very short period of time with some of the AI models. So I think that that's a plus that could cut down on a lot of the time that we see, say, during legislative sessions. At the same time, you know, policy as it's given to an elected official is written by someone, right? So those are your gatekeepers in an office. So the worst thing that you could do, going back to the last point that I made, is take information from AI, not know where it's coming from, not know where it's sourced from, and you potentially write a bad piece of legislation and hand it off to an elected official who may not be researching it on their own, and that automatically turns into a communication snafu, or that automatically turns into a snafu on their end. So just use it to your advantage. But I don't see it proliferating in a way where it takes over the need to have basic writing skills in the field.
Awesome. So, first off, before we continue, Jasmine is sharing some things in the chat, and I'll be sharing them right now. But for panelists, okay, we have some Q&A from the students, and
Yeah.
they're very excited. And so I definitely want to just tackle them as because they're coming back at the back, and I want to give y'all the opportunity to directly address their concerns or whatever. One of the students asked, like, why should we as college students believe in the public service space when it seems like it's entertainment instead of true advocacy?
Mm.
Mm.
I would go, ooh.
I can be the unpopular one on the panel since I no longer live in Texas.
I'm gonna
How
let
about
you
that?
be the unpopular one, but what I will say is, think about what we said at the onset of this entire thing. Policy is king. And regardless to what the public arena showcases, policy is still king in democracy.
Mm.
And so, although there are great debacles made around politics and democracy, I would go as far as to say that that's what they want you to believe.
Mm.
Is that this is all foolish. You don't need to be in this space because it's all foolish, right? I would go as far as to say that's a distraction from the work. The opposition benefits when there are folks who believe that they shouldn't be a part of the work because it's foolish. And so especially when they have the authority to make it appeal that way, I think you have to see through that and still persevere to be a part of it, because the folks are still meeting at decision making tables. They're still talking about laws that will impact your life and still writing those laws. That isn't stopping, right? But if you allow that to be the gate that keeps you out, then there's just one less angle of representation that's there to channel thought, to be devil's advocate, and to poke holes. So all of that is true. Even at the local level, all the way up to federal, there's a lot of debauchery happening. That's just politics. That has nothing to do with policy. The policy is still going through rigmarole. Like I mentioned, folks are still collaborating and communicating to push policy out that either benefits or does not benefit communities that they serve. And so I would just encourage you to see past that. Gavin, you have something more unpopular?
So I mean, I'll keep it as succinct as possible, right? You invite a clown, you get a circus, okay?
Thanks.
And we have to be cognizant. We can talk all day long about what's going on in DC, right? But the average everyday human being, when you're thinking about going to the grocery store and picking up a carton of eggs, or turning on your lights at your house, or a pothole tearing up your car, right? Those are decisions that are made at the state and the local level. You have to ensure that you are electing people that can do the people's business at the state and local level. And the unpopular piece of that is this, y'all. The person that can get the job done may not be the most popular person on social media.
Thanks.
They may not be the person who says all of the things that you want to hear. They may be the person that's able to point out, these are the ways that we get to this common goal by compromise, or these are the ways that we get to the common goal by bringing to the business community to the table, or involving the voice of young folk. That's what makes public service worthwhile. But when we start electing individuals simply because they have a good campaign slogan, or because they have a bunch of followers on TikTok and Instagram, some of which are bought and paid for, or because when you go out to certain places in Memphis or certain places in Nashville or DC, they're always on the social scene, that makes them a good public figure, right? But that doesn't necessarily make them a good or effective public servant. Public policy is going to go on no matter what, right? It's the guardrails. Those guardrails are going to be there no matter what. But we have to think about, on that highway that I talked about, that politics highway, who's driving the car? And I don't know about y'all, but I'm too tall to ride in a clown car. So stop inviting the clowns. Stop inviting the clowns to the public forum. And I think we get back on par, and that allows us to make public service worthwhile again.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you both hit that perfectly. But I will say it's true. I do think that a lot of the debauchery is a distraction. So I would just encourage you all to look at legislation as it's coming through on all levels and see who's sponsoring the bill, who co-sponsored, what is it actually, what policies are actually embedded in this that may not be explicitly spelled out, because there's a lot going on right now where there's unintended consequences that are baked into the legislation, because a lot of people that are in power, they know that we're distracted and we're not really paying attention. So I would just encourage you to educate yourself. Don't depend on what you're hearing, because a lot of what you're hearing is omitting a lot of what you actually need to know, especially as we are talking about up and coming legislation. So and when you're looking at who sponsored, who co-sponsored, and how it's getting passed through, those are the peoples whose voices are respected when it comes down to the votes, when it comes down to getting funding, resources, whatever that may be. So, yeah, don't just listen, look, learn for yourself, because it's a lot going on, and we can't be fooled. And just for you highlighting the fact that there is a lot of debauchery, and that's a sign too, because some people think that's part of the process.
Right.
So for you to be able to know that there's something that is not normal or should be accepted, you're well on your way already.
Maya, if I can just add a couple sprinkles on top, and then we won't spend any more time on this question, but I think it's a really good question. is that if you are choosing a career in public service, your why, my why, is not baked into public service. Public service is the vehicle. My why is baked into my aunt who can't pay her mortgage because she has to pay so much money for her prescription every month, right? Because policy drives that. My why is baked into my kids going to public school and making sure that they have quality books and curriculum because policy dictates that, right? And so I think if your why is baked into the grassroots communal impact of policy, then it's easy for you to do what Takesha just said, have that sense of discernment to see through a lot of the smoke and mirrors of the debauchery. Whereas if you're getting involved in public service just because you want that career, it may be a little bit disheartening because you may not you're not planted, right? Plant yourself in any career that you decide to go into. If there's a way to plant your why into a very grassroots communal reasoning for joining that space, then it will allow you to persevere and push through all of the stuff on the forefront.
Thank y'all so much. And I just think one of the things that you guys kind of hammered on, like look deeper, like what you said, stay grounded, stay rooted in the grassroots, in the real why, and read who's sponsoring all of those different things. It's deeper than what we see, like the entertainment aspect of it all. Sure. That's true in every aspect of life, because even beyond politics, this is rampant in corporate America.
Yeah.
One student wants to ask, how do you balance short-term community needs with long-term systemic change?
I guess I'll take that one. So, I mean, I think the easiest way I'm going to use an analogy, right? And then I'll kind of explain where I'm going with the analogy. There's this old saying about the easiest way to eat an elephant is a piece at a time. Okay. And I've always approached policy in that fashion. The way that you balance the two is understanding that pretty much all goals that you're going to make are going to take incremental steps. So any piece of policy, unless it's a short-term fix, but even something as simple as road paving, right? We can't just come along and say that tomorrow we're going to pave all of Interstate 240. That's just not how budgets work. That's not how policy work. There's a review and a regulatory process that has to happen. It sounds great, and it goes back to the point that Takesha and Jasmine were just making. It makes a good soundbite, but that in reality is not how we work. What we can decide is how much is the incrementalism, right? We can decide how fast we're driving towards the goal. Still doesn't change the fact that it's not going to happen overnight, but it does change the fact of how long it takes us to get there. That's where the balance comes in. And that's where community input is key. That's a part of the balancing process. That's where understanding those that are on your team, their strengths and weaknesses. So if you're with the city, right, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of your engineering department, your public works department, that's going to decide a lot of different things relative to your budget, your policy plan, and otherwise. And I think the other part is I'm a huge proponent of any elected official and any high-ranking public policy official, because everything has a sunset. The average person is not going to be in office more than 8 years, and most policy professionals are going to transition in and out with those elected officials as they come out in 4 to 8 years. Set some non-negotiable goals on the front end. So mandate to yourself, mandate to the person that you're working for, these at the end of your term, these are the 2 to 3 things that no matter what, we have to accomplish. They need to be actionable, they need to be obtainable, and they need to have input from all on the team. If you do those things, your short-term and long-range planning are going to plan themselves out, right? But you have to have buy-in. So.
In addition to that, I would just say, I really like the point you just made, Gavin, around go ahead and set those concrete goals on the front end. That way you can tack on to them. In addition to what would I like to see by the time, what would we like to see by the time we leave this office or this administration? What are the short-term wins along the way?
Bingo.
Right. So when we talk about short-term community needs, frame your short-term wins around those needs. So that when you leave, not only have you been doing this incremental trucking towards this long-term goal, you've checked some boxes along the way that doesn't just appease community, but that is important in politics. Let's be real. But also actually accomplishes things on behalf of community. I think too, we have to see bureaucracy, public service, the public sector as puzzle, meaning that the policy is just one piece of it. In these spaces professionally, I challenge you all to do the very best that you can to create coalition, to make partnerships, and create community with other entities doing the work that may not be in public service, because you may have some resources to empower those entities to be able to accomplish the short-term community needs, right? It should not be on the backs of one person or one office to get those things done. And so, and if you're hoarding the plate, then that's problematic, right? So how can you, one of the things I'm pretty sure Takesha was very acquainted with at the city is, we're writing policy to be able to make sure that we have resources to disperse out to community nonprofits that do the work on the ground. Create that ecosystem so that everybody gets a piece of, so that everybody gets a tool out of the tool bag to be able to do the work, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And two, sometimes that systemic, it's helpful to work backwards. So you're looking at the problem, is this whole big thing, and then you're thinking about those small, right now things that you could do to make an impact. So maybe homelessness is the issue. I mean, we can't eradicate that in one sitting, but what we can do, or what I was able to do when I was working as a legislative analyst, was have community drives. Simple as that. Go out into the community, provide resources, whether that is having community drive, you giving away diapers and stuff, or maybe that looks like going out giving out food, but that also looks like passing an ordinance or resolution that says, okay, we're going to give X amount of dollars to start a new hub facility in a different part of town, because we have one downtown, but we need one further out in a different part of town. So while those may not feel like systemic change is happening, it is making those smaller steps to make a longer term impact. But don't discredit the small things, because the small things do have an impact on the larger issues.
I don't know. This is my favorite question that y'all answered. Like everybody
Mhm.
ate with this because there's so many jewels in that. I love how you said, Gavin, set your non-negotiables from the beginning. This is what I want to accomplish by the time we're done with this. Jasmine, I love how you said, like, coalition build, because all of it can't just be from a policy standpoint, right? There are other organizations and entities that can support the change to manage both long and short term. Takesha, I just love how you said, like, work backwards. It's just, I don't know, it all comes together. Like, it's actually like, even if you don't decide to go into policy or whatever side of policy you go into, I just feel like if you're interested in community engagement and change, like all of these pieces of advice are relevant, and we should all just kind of keep them in our back pockets. So for the next question, someone says, what structures have you built or you think should be built to hold yourself and your office accountable to the people that you serve?
Now, I'll just fire off on this one real quick. Your office should have regularly scheduled meetings in community, not just reactive, but like proactive. Once quarterly or once a month will be in these different communities. And one of the reasons why I don't think it should be reactive is because it's based off of something happening, right? And it means, like, if something doesn't happen, do you go? And so I think that having avenues by which folks can access you or your elected official, whoever you're working for. So the email should be able to go through, the phone should be able to be answered. People should be able to show up and get on the calendar. And there should be an intentional effort from the office to say, this is my schedule for the rest of the year, the rest of the quarter, by which I'm going to be doing community meetings. It shows a level of intentionality to community that I am planning for you, and so that they can also come prepared with their questions and what have you. But just making sure that it's baked into your schedule like anything else, like a city council meeting or anything else. It should be on the books and broadly communicated to folks.
Yeah, I think that there are three pieces. One's tied to the business community because I spend a decent amount of time in the private sector. The other is tied to the elected piece. On the business end, I think that there has to be across this country community reinvestment reform.
Mm.
I think that we've reached the life cycle. Takesha maybe will disagree with me a little bit, but I think that we've reached the life cycle in a lot of ways on the ingeniousness of pilots. So pilots, for those that are planning on going into the field of payment in lieu of taxes, which can work. They're a great tool when performed effectively and when you have good actors. They're an amazing tool. But I think that we need to codify somewhere um, the fact that if you're going to do business in a community, that there has to be some sort of investment piece
Hmm.
with your community. One of the reasons, that I think FedEx has been so successful is because when you talk to people that have been at FedEx for a very long time, they tell you, like even going back to the 80s and the 70s, FedEx took care of their people. And it allowed people that may not have had the highest realm of education to carve out a middle class and in some cases upper middle class life in Memphis, simply because they took care of their people and they invested in the community that they did business in multiple ways. So that's the first piece. Only elected things, two things that we've been beating our drums about for the past 25 years. And that would be mandatory. I think that we need to have mandatory reform around term limits. Um,
Mm.
Part of the problem is that a lot of people overstay their welcome. And when you have someone that's popular, but they aren't necessarily effective, them serving outside of their terms can come at a hindrance, a vast hindrance to their community. And the last one will be campaign finance reform. I think if we're able to get dark money out of politics, or at least govern the way in which dark money functions within politics, we would be able to get rid of some of that clownery or debauchery that we talk about that goes on. Because you'd be surprised when you start looking at the money trails, you would be very, very surprised who's donating to who. And it may not be the individuals that are on the side of the aisle of the person that's running for office. You'd be very surprised from school board on up. So those three pieces: community reinvestment, campaign finance, and term limits.
I would say, especially in my role now, and at the time that I came in, really driving that transparency piece, that community transparency. So initially, the chamber was funded by the government funds, and then we transitioned to being privately funded by our investors. So there's a lot of myths associated with the chamber, thinking that we only advance policies or provide resources to the big businesses or the rich people. So something that was really important to me coming into this space was creating conversations with our community that felt intentional, that felt more proactive than reactive, though I came on the back end. So we were on the reactive side of that. But just going forward, as we have different investment coming to Memphis that the chamber is involved in, part of my role is ensuring that the community is informed about what we're doing, and when it comes to investment, when we have the opportunity to determine what investment looks like in a community, that the voices that need to be heard are at the table. And I think I've been kind of driving that piece home a lot, not just knowing what we think people want to see, but really hearing what it is that they need and they would like the investment to look like. So definitely creating those intentional conversations, um, those spaces, even if that means going out into the community, because we did a series of economic development one-on-one conversations where we went out to people's homes where they convened a group of maybe 10 or 15 people to hear and ask questions that they just couldn't find in the media. The news has been so unresourceful lately. So there's just a need to create spaces for real conversations to be had. So you can ask the questions, get them answered, and I promise you, it makes such a huge difference. We had about 20 of those conversations, and every single one of them, we left out with people saying, "Thank you so much. I didn't know this. I wasn't getting this from the news." And they felt like their voices were heard. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay, awesome. So my next question would be, and I'm sorry, y'all, they coming through with them. I want to make sure we hit as many as
Good.
possible. Steps do you guys take to check your own biases and prevent them from influencing your policy outcomes?
Go ahead, Gavin.
Go ahead, go ahead. So for me, and I'm gonna give a little background information, you know, and if I ever end up running for political office, it's probably good that I've put this information out here now so that it doesn't come back and bite me, right? So I began my career um, while a registered Democrat and a young Democrat. I began my career because that's who would hire me, working in a Republican office, right? So daily, I had to kind of put aside my own political beliefs. Unfortunately, I was working for Finance, Ways and Means. So ultimately, and this was a time when Tennessee did not have a supermajority on either side of the aisle. And we had an amazing governor and some amazing things were going on. But what that did allow me, require me to do every day, especially working for a fairly liberal conservative, was check my own ideas about what needed to happen at the door. Now, did that mean that I had to sit in a corner and go along to get along? Not really. Because fortunately, if you're working for someone that understands the value that you bring to the table, they're going to bring you in and they're going to ask you for your input, right?
Mhm.
But understand that if you choose a career in policy, a lot of times you don't get to choose who you work for, right? Civil servants, especially at the federal level, they work at the will of the federal government. And the federal government, every 4 years or every 8 years, 9 chances out of 10, is going to change political party. At the local level, a mayor in Memphis is only going to get 8 years, right? So if you plan on being on the policy side, behind the scenes, 9 chances out of 10, there's going to be someone that comes behind the person that originally hired you that may have a different set of ideology than you. It goes back to the first point that we made when we first started talking about this, and that's humility. You have to be in a space of humility to understand A, everything that you desire may not be the desire of the will of the body or the will of the people. And B, just because something doesn't happen on a Monday doesn't mean it doesn't happen by a Friday, right? Just because we didn't get a policy outcome today, and that's the policy outcome that you were fighting for, it doesn't mean that down the line that policy outcome doesn't happen. You just have to be able to sit back and understand those pieces and be patient.
Mhm. Mhm.
I would say, one, somebody write that down. Just because it don't happen on a Monday, don't mean it won't happen by Friday. That sounds like a sermon. Um, but in line with what Gavin has said, I think that, being a millennial, and I would take it that most folks that are listening into this are not millennials. And so you all have had the luxury of fully walking to digital era. We grew up in a time where we didn't have a whole lot of things that y'all have, but we also were ushered into it. So we're kind of that middle generation that have lived both lives. What I would say is that there is a likelihood. I want you to be intentional about pushing back against the likelihood that your reality is curated by an algorithm,
Mm.
right? I think that we have to be honest with ourselves about how much our interests are played into, from where we shop at to what we view on social medias to what we see on our streaming services. It all is cultivated and curated for our own personal experience, which means that it's cultivated and curated for our perspective and point of view. So that means that you have to make an intentional effort to push back against that, and one of the ways that you can do that is by seeking out perspectives that differ from your own. And that's one of the ways that you can check and channel a different, and not channel against bias.
Mhm.
So if if you have friends and all y'all do is groupthink, right, which means that we get in the same room and all of us have the same perspective about this thing, then what does it look like for you to diversify that group? How can you find somebody on campus that thinks totally different from you and friend them and then have constructive dialogue with them, just to poke holes, not to change your mind about anything, but just to make sure that what you stand on is because you actually stand on it, not because it's been fed to you, right? One of the easiest ways to do this is like if you all Google online, you could be able to see like media bias chart, like where do all the national media platforms fall as it relates to like left leaning, right leaning, and central.
Mhm.
See where you get your information from. Where do they fall? Do you usually look at media that falls on the left side? I'm not saying anybody should be far right or far left, but what I am saying is make concerted efforts to diversify where you're getting your information from on a media standpoint, who you're having your conversations with, so that you have a well-rounded and informed perspective. So that even if you don't take on those perspectives, you at least have a notion of what those perspectives are. When you're in a policy space, especially like Gavin mentioned, maybe working for someone that may not be as aligned with you, then you need to have some of those considerations in mind. And it's even beneficial if you are working for somebody on the same side of the aisle as you, just so you don't fall into groupthink. So that would just be my thing, making a concerted effort to surround yourself with other perspectives when, as we know, our current realities are so curated to our own interests and beliefs.
Mhm. And not much to add, but it's okay. We all have biases. So don't shy away from the reality that we all have them. But again, just inform yourself on what your biases may be and welcome. um, Contrary opinions or perspectives, because you can agree to disagree, but in order
Mhm.
to be a well-rounded advocate, you have to know all sides of the argument. You can't just focus on what you believe or what you're hearing starkly from another side. Be open-minded to really understand and hear. And sometimes you don't really understand, but make sure that you're hearing all aspects of the argument and knowing what your biases are, and then figuring out what's the best way to drive home what is really good for the best interest of all.
I like that, especially first off what you said to Keisha, like everyone has biases. We all do as a part of being human. But as Jasmine said, try to step outside of your, silo and go explore other things. At the very least, to just be informed on what other people are saying and where they're coming from, right? And those experiences like Gavin had of working with people who do differ from you, those are things that just mold you. Even if you stay true to who you are, they help mold you into a stronger, advocate for what you believe, because it's hard to argue when you're coming from a place of ignorance, right?
Can I add to that, Mia?
Yeah, for
So
sure.
I definitely want to say, in tandem with what the points that Jazz and Takesha just made, that allows you to do something that I think on all sides of the political spectrum we're not doing anymore, and that's humanize one another, right?
Mm.
When you're forced to sit down with, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, when you're forced to sit down and have those discussions face to face with someone, and you realize, A, half this stuff is really not as important as the algorithm is making it for us, but B, there's a person that's sitting across from me that has a basic set of human needs, and I have a basic set of human needs. We just view our pathways on getting to those human needs a little bit differently. It really allows you to sit back and think, okay, well, what's really going on here, right? Is it really that we disagree, or is it that these sides are being presented to us in a way that makes us disagree? So I just wanted to add that piece on that.
Oh no, that's definitely a great point. Thank you for adding that, Gavin.
No worries.
So for the next question, we will say, how do you sustain personal resilience and avoid burnout while facing constant public scrutiny and political obstacles?
Wow. Okay.
No pressure.
We have to repeat that one.
Sure. So how do you sustain personal resilience and avoid burnout while facing constant public scrutiny and political obstacles?
You know, I think that one, elected leadership is going to face the most scrutiny. So if you're someone who's working more so behind the scenes on policy, nobody's like, where is his analyst at? Nobody's asking those kinds of questions. They're not looking for the analyst. But I will say, just at any given point in time, the politics can be disheartening. The politics can be tiring. It can make you burn out, especially if you've been working on a policy for a really long time and it stands to have great impact, but then it's meeting these political gridlocks and you don't understand, why can't this just go through? It's good for the people, right? That's enough to make you walk away. I think that it's helpful to have a faith system, whatever you believe in something. So that you can revert back to that, right? If you believe in, if it's religion, if it's community, whatever it is, have a sounding board for you to be able to pull back into. So part of that resilience is just helping yourself to understand that you are doing the work that needs to be done on behalf of community, and that is needed nonetheless. And what better person than you to go to war? You know what I mean? Like, just look at it like you're putting shield on. You reframe your perspective about your strength in the fight. But those political obstacles are real. I mean, I think every day, probably for the past 7 months, 9 months, or however long we've been in this year, we probably all wake up a little bit. I know I do. I don't know about anybody else, but wake up a little bit in dismay, disarray, disheartened a little bit. But like I mentioned in one of the answers to one of the last questions, if your why is steeped in a place that resonates with community, that you can point out tangible folks, you can name people from your real life that stand to benefit from a policy or stand to be impacted if something goes adversely, that helps me to strap my boots back on each day and say, okay, we got to go back in. We got to go back in the lab. We got to work on this nonetheless. And then last piece, just to that point that we made earlier about, the mirage of balance. It's okay to take a beat. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to step back. You know what I mean? Especially for my Black people on the call. I just gonna put that out there because I think we do a job on ourselves of holding chronic stress in these fights. And so it's okay to take a break, take the weekend off, take the day off, say, I'm going to cut out. Today has been heavy. Let me rest, right? But then in that same vein of rest, it's equally worthwhile to suit back up and go back in the morning. So that would be my reflection.
I would say in tandem with what Jazz spoke about, faith first and foremost. But when we go right under faith, make sure that you have a group of accountability partners. Do not surround yourself with yes people. Jazz's husband and I, in full disclosure, have been friends for almost 20 years. And it can be a simple 15-minute check-in.
It's never 15 minutes.
It's more than 15 minutes, but it can be a simple 15-minute check-in. We're gonna check in with each other just to make sure, inside of work and outside of work, man to man, are you okay? Right? Mm-hmm. And we as males, I think one of the biggest disservices that we do ourselves is saying that we don't need that we don't need that camaraderie or that brotherhood to check in and make sure that you're okay. That's a mental health piece. That's a physical health piece. That's a health piece. So accountability partners. Two, to the point that Jazz made, love on yourself. Like, whatever that looks like. If that's a spa day, if that's you sitting at home, what's the show everybody's watching now? If it's sitting at home watching Love Island, right? Whatever that may be for you. For me, because I live so close to Canada, I spend a lot of time in Canada. If I've had a heavy week, I may wake up and decide, I'm going to drive to Montreal this weekend, or I'm going to go to some of the other places. Whatever makes you happy, do that. Because in those moments where life does get heavy, that brings you back to focus and that brings you back to your why. And the last piece, always go back to your why. Always go back to your why. The moment you go back to your why and it's not your why anymore, it's time for you to move on. Okay. Mm-hmm. I remember after the 2016 election, I remember that night vividly. And I remember how gutted I felt after it was done. And I remember distinctly in the moment with a bunch of my frat brothers thinking that we were going to be celebrating, and that celebration turning into a night of mourning. I remember for a split second thinking, you know what? I need to walk away from policy. By that time, I was teaching K-12. I can just go become an assistant principal or a principal, and I'll just kind of coast off into the sunset. And I woke up the next morning and the sun was out, and I realized, okay, it's time to put your boots back on and figure out what the next saddle is going to be, right? So that going back to your why always should pull you back and ground you. So love on yourself. Make sure you have some accountability partners. Don't surround yourself with yes people. And always be able to come back to your why.
Well, they said everything I was going to say, so I have nothing to add.
Awesome. It kind of goes back to that work-life balance. Even though it doesn't fully exist, when you do engage in that love for yourself, like really pour into that, right? Don't give it all to these jobs, careers, save some for yourself and your family.
Mhm.
So now we are at the top of the hour. We have about 10 more minutes. I think we're going to do something a little different. I kind of want to do a quick lightning round with you guys. I'm going to ask each of you guys like one question about your particular field or something, what you do, and you have around like 2 minutes to answer, nothing too much. So I guess we'll start with Miss Takesha. So business and policymakers, what you do, connect those two. They kind of have it can be one of those things that kind of has the public doesn't necessarily trust it, right? Because I mean, are there bribes being given? Who's getting what? Are there any misconceptions you would want to clear up about like what you do if someone was interested in it, and to just make the public trust a bit more?
Yeah. So again, that why is so important. At the core of my work and what drives me to do this work is because I've always lawyer by trade. So graduated from Memphis Law. Prior to that, I was an educator as well. So I knew Gavin from Teach for America, where I taught middle school at kids in North Memphis. And I always knew that I wanted to, and I always feel like this sounds so cliche, but I always wanted to be in a space where I could give a voice to the voiceless, because I realized coming from a, a both of my parents were pretty young when they had me. So first generation college student, grew up in a small town, under resourced. I always knew the issues that plagued the community that I came from. But I also realized that a lot of people in those communities didn't speak up because they didn't have the avenues to speak up, or they didn't know what they didn't know. So they didn't know what questions to ask, but they just knew every day they woke up, they had these set of issues, or these disparities in their communities. So I wanted to put myself in a space where I could bring those voices to the table. So I worked a little bit for Council for Court Excellence in DC, where I did a lot of work on evaluating the services provided by the child welfare system and the delinquency system, and how they service students that were in the child welfare system that ultimately ended up in the delinquency system, and what are best practices to be more proactive than reactive, because of course we don't want young people that have shown clear disadvantages that they're facing or struggling with to push them into the criminal justice system, which typically becomes a cyclical thing. Fast forward, I'm doing a lot of talking, but I know well beyond my 2 minutes. Still at the core of my why was providing a voice to young people that are going through these systems. So it was that. Then, as a legislative analyst for city council, it was still the people in those communities. Now, again, I work with some people whose priorities may not have looked exactly like mine, but I was able to say, hey, because I was the one getting the constituent calls. So the constituents in the community are saying that they don't feel safe because it's disgusting. There's trash everywhere. So that looked like writing an ordinance to specifically address blight remediation. So again, giving that voice, and they look different. So here on the business side, which was not even a sector that I knew that I was interested in or that I was a good fit for. And I think too with policy, you begin to learn, like you know your why at your core, but then you get more comfortable moving into spaces with that why, with the knowledge you've built along the way. And it may not look exactly how you thought it was going to look, but you're still able to do the work that is meaningful to you in the communities that you seek to advocate for. So with this, because there's such taboo associated with the business community and how they deal with, you know, the broader body of people, I found it particularly um, a particular honor to be able to debunk some of those myths. We are not out here to make these side deals that's harmful to the community. What we're trying to do is bring investment into the city of Memphis that we all know and love, that makes us feel safer, that gives us living wages, not just good pay, but wages that you can live on so that your families can live on, so that we could impact workforce development. All of this stuff is housed within the chamber that a lot of people don't know about. Workforce development, you know, there's programming out here that funds are associated with that young people can tap into to get trades and other skills that position them to be able to go and work for some of our investor companies, whether it's manufacturing or some other industry. But from big business to small business, the work that I'm at the core doing is making sure that what we are advocating for, the business investments, are to make sure that the people here can stay here, they feel safe here, and they can make a living comfortably for themselves and their families. So that's what I wish people knew about the chamber. That's what's really going on. We're out here doing the work for our people, not to our people.
Oh, I love that. You are not stealing, you're advocating. Got it.
Yes, yes.
All right. So next, Mr. Gavin, this is going to be kind of a similar question. I
Okay.
mean, lobbying, that's the big bad wolf. When you think about in the policy world, can you please, explain to people that, what it's actually like, what it actually means? Are you harming the people of America?
No, no, not at all. As a corporate lobbyist, I worked for a utility regulator, and I was basically tasked with A, ensuring that they made a profit, but B, I got to do a lot of cool things in tandem with that. One of which was facilitating electric bike infrastructure throughout central New York, allowing us to make sure that we're able to turn a railway that had been abandoned about 25 to 30 years ago, turn it into a cross county rail trail for electric bikes and regular bikes. There's a job component piece, making sure that small businesses have some startup money, that they're able to hire more individuals through grant opportunities. And then there's the community investment piece. For me, everything in my why goes back to my mom, and I always tell the story. My mom was one of many children, first female in her family to go to university, went to university on a Pell Grant and a dream, right? And it's only because of effective lobbying during the Carter administration that they were able to expand that Pell Grant in a way that people that were on the higher end of low income, that they could go to college without incurring debt, and that happened because of effective lobbying. So, two of those that is the one reason why I believe in the power of lobbying. I make no qualms about the fact that I'm a lobbyist, but also why I also am a staunch advocate for education. So those two pieces connect both parts of my practice.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, there's a lot of great lobbying. You don't have to sell your soul. You can do the good work and, affect community. And
Absolutely.
lastly, Jasmine. So with you training candidates from across the country, I mean, all the way to Alaska is incredible. Tell us like really quickly, if someone on the line is interested, what makes a good candidate and what makes a good campaign and what's to stop them from losing the way, we've seen other people lose in the past.
Yeah, I may need a whole nother hour for that, but I think quite honestly, what makes a good candidate to me is and I know y'all, we've been talking about why real heavy, but it's all situated in why are you running? If you can't explain to me your motivation to run without mentioning the person that's already in the seat, without mentioning what better time than now, you're right, like all these theoretical things, if you can't associate your why to a real tangible issue, to real tangible community, to real tangible impact, then I think that you may need to take a beat before you decide to run. I think that the electoral space has been inundated with folks who are seeking political gain, personal gain, financial gain, and not gains on behalf of community. And I think that once we can get democracy back to community voice and community focus, then it could be democracy again with a capital D. I think democracy now is very fragmented, and I would even argue to say I don't know if it all the way is true democracy as it was originally intended to be. What makes a good campaign is a candidate who is willing to solicit support. And so being able to activate the relationships that you have around you to pour into and put effort into your campaign. Any training that I do, you'll hear me say is if there's one thing that I hate, it's an octopus candidate. Somebody may say, Jazz, what's an octopus candidate? It's a person who thinks they can do all things by themselves. You cannot, right? In no form of life, and in electoral space is no different. And so having a firm why, orchestrating your entire campaign, your commitment, all those things around that why, and then building a real grassroots communal campaign full of folks who can lend themselves their their efforts and expertise to helping you run and win is a key component. And then just not allowing your ear to community stop at election day, right? That's actually when your ears should start to open. You start to listen and understand, what do people want, what do people need, not being not allowing that to stop your training. How do I now become a great elected official? I was a great candidate. Now I got to learn how to become a great elected official, right? Because it doesn't automatically translate. So being continuously open to training and continuously keeping your ear to the ground community will get you a long way.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much. Now I got one last question for everybody, and this is the one that the students I know want to know the most. Are there jobs? Will they be able to be employed after graduation in this?
1,000%.
1,000%.
1,000%.
With
One thing about
livable
like we said, policy is law, y'all. Policy won't let up. You can get a policy job in the private sector, in the public sector, in the nonprofit sector, anywhere, like quite honestly. So policy is actually one of those spaces that isn't getting the life squeezed out of it. It's actually a great space to lean into if you're looking for employment, because the opportunities are also so diverse. It's a very webbed career.
And I definitely think that we'll be seeing some sort of expansion, right, with the integration of AI. And depending on what happens after this current administration, there's going to be some level of turnover at the federal level. So I would say if you're in college right now, you're probably in a prime space for 2026, 2027, 2028 to position yourself for some really cool opportunities.
And in the meantime, like we have said, intern, get fellowships, like get out there and go ahead and start getting acclimated so that when those jobs do come about, somebody calls you. I will end on this note. No job that I have gotten post college has been because I applied. So if there is anything that I can leave you with, your network can work for you. The relationships that you make can work for you. Make it where people say your name in rooms when you're not there, right? And then do the same for the folks that come up behind you, because that's what we do when we have been done well for ourselves.
Awesome. And also we have some pretty big, a pretty big election coming up next year in 2026. So there's a lot of opportunities to get involved, volunteer, get to meet, rub shoulders for a lot of y'all college students. So yeah, thank y'all so much to our wonderful speakers. I know we didn't get to all of the questions, but I've listed all of their social media, you know, if you guys want to reach out to them on LinkedIn, if that's okay with you guys. And just connect with them. Please expand your network, ask any questions. And thank y'all again for so much for speaking. And thank you, students, for so much for listening. And yeah, it's been
Thank y'all for having us.
awesome.
Thank y'all.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.